There is so much disruption going on with companies these days that a leader might feel like that they're being attacked from all different sides at the same time. So how can CEOs, IT leaders, and even managers take this cross pressure and become better at their jobs? We're going to speak with the author of a new book that describes this new management concept on this episode of Today in Tech. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Joining me on the show today is Robert Siegel. He is a lecturer in management at the Stanford Graduate School of Business. He's also a venture investor, and he's author of this book, The Systems Leader, which should be available right now. So run to the bookstore or order it online. He's also a repeat guest on Today in Tech. So welcome back. We're happy to have you back on the show, Rob.
Thanks, Keith. Always a joy to be back and great to see you again.
All right. So the new book, The Systems Leader. I think when you were on the show the last time, you had these concepts that you were mulling over in your head, or you're in the middle of writing it or finishing it. So, now they've all molded together into this book. And again, I got an advanced copy. I was able to read it on a flight down to Texas and back. So quick read, but also very good. And so it discusses this concept of systems leadership. You tell me if I got this right. It basically is being able to respond to competing pressures, which you call cross pressures, across a lot of different categories. So before we get into what a lot of these cross pressures might be, when did you start first noticing this in the business world as something that you wanted to write a book about versus maybe management concepts from the 70s, 80s, 90s, et cetera?
So I started teaching a class called Systems Leadership about 8 years ago with my old boss and friend, Jeff Immelt, the former CEO of GE.
Right.
As he was transitioning out, we were looking originally about how, as a world blends digital and physical, how do you have to lead differently? And so we started talking about this as he had been transforming GE. As COVID happened, the course really took on this kind of notion of crisis leadership. And coming out of COVID, we were realizing that we seem to be in this world of constant crisis and increasingly rapid technological innovation. And that was really challenging business leaders. It was almost like they didn't know what to do. And so I described some of these challenges as cross pressures, as you referred to. Mm-hmm. And the idea behind systems leadership builds on a lot of the work that Peter Senge started on in the 90s about systems thinking, understanding action and reaction inside of systems. It can be inside of a company, between a company and its ecosystem. But we also kind of layered on this notion that systems leaders need to really layer on this dualities of certain things that might have existed inside of a company that now need to exist inside of us as individuals because things are happening so quickly. And so the cross pressures, there's 5 of them that I describe in the book. We look at how certain leaders that we studied manage these cross pressures by applying systems leadership and systems thinking and certain things that they do. Now, the whole point of the book is not all of them are perfect. All of these leaders are perfect. They've made mistakes. But what can we learn from both their successes and their failures?
Yeah, you definitely do point out some of the successes and some of the failures, and good leaders versus I think there's a chapter called unserious leaders, which I'll get into in a second. But up until now, what was the dominant form of leadership style that I think most companies adopt? Or is it so much, or is it depend on the company, depend on the personality of the CEO? For example, a lot of companies adopt that Jack Welch style, since you mentioned GE, and I'm sure Jeff Immelt had a lot of that as well, right? And you worked for General Electric, so you're familiar with that. Has there been other ones? I'm going to give you one other one that I loved. In the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, there was a book called Make It So, which was like what business leadership skills you can learn from Captain Picard.
Right.
And if you were a fan of Star Trek The Next Generation, the book was great because it cited examples from the show about how Picard was such a different leader than Captain Kirk. And before we get down this nerd hole, as an upcoming, kind of business person in the 90s, I was like, that makes sense. It was more about leading through collaboration, but still making the decision rather than just, gung-ho cowboy diplomacy thing that Captain Kirk had. So has there been any other since then? Because at that point, I'm not in management, so I don't have to read a lot of business books now.
Well, what I would say is that in the old days, even when I was running companies, either when I worked for GE or Intel or the startups that I ran, or even as a venture capitalist, You came up within a function inside of an organization: sales, marketing, engineering, manufacturing, and you got good at what you did, and you had your teammates and they did their things, and hopefully everybody did well and the company succeeded. I think what's happened in a world of increasingly rapid technologic change, we have to know more about what's happening outside of our little box to understand action and reaction. And a great example of that is, the sales force in the company might sell something which might have a tremendous change in engineering, which then might impact manufacturing, and that could impact customer behaviors and customer happiness. And great leaders understand the ripple effects of these things. And I think what's different today is because things are so interconnected, leaders need to be able to process what's happening in different functions, both inside of their company and outside of their company. So I think what's different is some of these dualities need to live inside of us. When I worked for Intel, in the 90s, as you were describing it, we had kind of the people who made the trains run on time. And then we had the people who were the crazy long hairs, which was like me when I worked in what was the predecessor of Intel Capital.
Yeah.
And we talked to each other and we liked each other, but we were in separate groups. Well, given the speed of change today, look at the rate of AI adoption. If you're basically responsible for delivering numbers, you've got to know quickly what new technologies are coming in so they can figure out how to get it into production and deployed quickly. And similarly, if you are developing the leading cutting edge technology for your organization, you've got to be thinking about commercialization quickly because the next new whizzy thing is coming shortly thereafter.
Right.
We as individuals and leaders need to know how to hit our numbers, but also manage innovation in small teams.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the things that's different is these dualities that we as individuals need to, embody. And that's when I talk about some of these cross pressures. That one that I just described is what I call priorities. How do you balance execution along with innovation?
Right. And I think we see this in the IT space too, in companies, because sometimes you could get a CIO, but then you also have a CTO, and there's one person in that position that just handles the putting out the fires, or if technical glitches, you're the firefighter and you're solving any glitches that go on with the company. But then the big vision is usually the CIO, and they're the ones that are external. It's almost like this internal external, which I believe is one of your cross pressures that you talk about in the book.
Exactly. And in fact, with that example, let me stick with that because it's such a good one. Let's talk about the CFO. If the CFO is going to bring AI into his or her function, right, all of a sudden he or she's got to be thinking about how am I changing my workflows for how I'm reporting the numbers in the team? How do I interact with the IT department? Oh, and by the way, I'm pulling numbers from other groups anyways.
Right.
So we see that even within a function, we've got to understand those actions and reactions.
Right. And again, in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, when we were talking about the IT groups, it was always about those putting out the fires. And we kept telling everybody in our articles and interviews and things like that, is like, you've got to learn the rest of the business, because otherwise the rest of the business is going to just kind of pass you by. And that's how you get things like shadow IT, rogue AIs, or shadow AI types of projects that you can't manage because it's so easy, because a lot of these business people now understand technology a lot more than they did in 30 years ago.
And if we look at AI, how are people using, whether it's Claude or ChatGPT or whatever's your favorite LLM, for things like writing email, doing presentations? I mean, for me as a teacher at Stanford, it is a fundamental issue for how I teach. Even if I'm teaching finance, even if I give the students problem sets and I'm trying to make sure that they understand the concepts that I taught, they can run it through the models today. And like the models, even versus 12 months ago, do a really good job of answering the questions. And I've got to ask myself, okay, it's just a tool. The students are going to use it anyways. How do I make sure that I test their mastery of the knowledge that we're trying to teach? And how do I even change what I need to teach them, given that some of the things that they did in the past might become more perfunctory? So this is kind of that notion of a systems leader, is trying to understand, how do I see what's going on and not fight the change? We fought AI for about 24 hours in education. And then it was like, they're gonna do it anyways. So all of a sudden you have to change your mindset for what I'm teaching, how I'm teaching. And that's true for countries broadly around the world, large and small.
Yeah. It was a lot more than 24 hours. I think you're under exaggerating just a little bit, or exaggerating a little bit. Okay. So when we talk about these cross pressures, give me some examples that you do in the book. I'm just going to throw out a couple: local versus global, like you said, execution versus innovation. There's the people section, which I think I want to ask you some more questions around that, where it's strength versus empathy. We've already mentioned internal, external, things like that. So, are all of these cross pressures hitting leaders all at the same time, or does it just matter? Maybe on one day it's this, maybe another day it's this, that kind of thing.
I'm going to argue the 5 I highlighted in the book are all hitting leaders all over the world at the same time.
Yeah.
On a single day, one might feel more sharp than others. So we talked about priorities, right? We talked about execution and innovation. Let's talk about geography, local and global. Even in a world, let's say China and the US split their tech stacks, we see tariffs and all these other things going on. Guess what? We're still in an interconnected world, and we're still going to be crossing borders. So one needs to understand, well, what happens in a community? Where are jobs? Let's say you're putting a factory there, or you're hiring software engineers in a particular location. They might be collaborating with people on the other side of the world. One of the leaders we studied is the CEO of Flex, and Revathi talked a lot about how for her factories, which are all over the world, how does she make sure her factories in Mexico know how to collaborate with her factories in Poland? And she's got to understand what's going on in each location, but also how they interact with each other. And another leader we studied on that was a gentleman named Khaldun Al-Mubarak, who's the CEO of Mubadala, a very well-known and very prominent investor in tech all over the world. Right? And he thinks about where they are in the UAE, how they have to do what's right for the Emirates, but also like they are caught between the great power struggle of China and the US and doing business with Europe. They take a friends to all approach and trying not to have exclusive alliances, because as a small player, they've got to figure out how to navigate through this. These are the types of things that leaders need to address. You mentioned people. One of the things that I talk about is leaders who need to actually show strength, but also have empathy for the men and women who work for them. Kathy Mazzarella runs a company called Graybar that most people haven't heard of. It's about 10,000 employees, $12 billion in revenue. It's the old Western Electric. Kathy was described by somebody as having an iron fist and a velvet glove, right? So she walks into a room, like we all sit up a little bit straighter. This is a leader who knows how to command a room, but she's one of the most human people I've ever met. And you see how she connects with people. So she holds people accountable, but like if someone's missing their numbers, she's trying to find out why is it? Is it a competency issue, or there's something personal going on in their life? It doesn't mean that it's okay to miss your numbers, but she tries to get to root cause and see the whole person.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of these dualities, you can't go to that old command and control system. Elon Musk can get away with it. He's Elon Musk. The rest of us aren't. So the question is how are we going to lead our teams as we're dealing with kind of all of these challenges, which keep coming at us? It seems like every day there's something new.
When I was reading the book, I kept thinking of these cross pressures as a pendulum that's going back and forth. And it feels like probably a lot of companies and leaders fall into the trap of focusing their energy on one of the extremes, right? Or, they pick a lane and the lane is there when everybody really needs to sort of understand that it's both, especially on the people versus empathy side of things. You see a lot of companies that just pick one or the other. They either go in and going, I don't care about my employees. I'm going to, send them all back to the office, so to speak. And, because we need to hit the numbers or we need to be more productive. And then there's other ones that say, no, we're just going to let everybody stay at home and then deal with that because we understand that people have lives and we need to be that company that cares about the employees. But that extreme too can be troublesome for companies sometimes too. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Like Aaron Levy from Box, we told some great stories about this and how they manage it. His answer is always, we are a company, like he talks about work-life balance. He says at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, if a customer calls us, we pick up the phone. And so our job is in that moment to be responsive to our customers. On the other hand, he says, I don't want to drive my people all the time, where they're working 24/7. But he wants to make sure that people know that the culture of Box is to be very customer responsive. So he kind of balances that notion and says very clearly, here's who we are, here are our priorities, here are our values as a company, and we will value you. But sometimes the customer comes first. And so you deal with that at moments in time, you've got to learn the nuance about how to navigate between situations and read it at a moment in time. By the way, dealing with generations is different. Gen X, you and I are OG Gen Xers, right? And then you've got the millennials who are different than us, and Gen Z is now different than Gen Xers. And as Gen Z is increasingly a larger part of the labor force, their lived experience is different.
Yeah.
What they experience kindergarten through 12 and what they experience as undergrads if they went to college, it's just different. So when we have to manage them, we've got to figure out how do we meet them where they are, but still hold people accountable for their jobs. And so this is a great leader has to have that nuance to be able to understand. You talked about a pendulum, and the pendulum it's constantly swinging, but also it's also sometimes hard to know where is a pendulum at a moment in time.
Right.
And so you've got to be very present and read it and adjust when needed, usually by a set of kind of values or set of heuristics that say here are our guiding principles, but how we apply them at a moment in time, you want to give people the judgment to make those decisions.
Right. When you talk about the generational differences and things like that, I think most of us in the older generations just look at that and go, well, I got yelled at by my bosses, and so I'm going to yell at them. And then it becomes like you're a curmudgeonly old man. And I don't know if that's right. But on the other hand, if you are listening to the concerns and you are, working with these new employees that have experienced life in different ways, then you might be accused of, well, you're just coddling the next generation.
Right, exactly.
And so that must just drive leaders crazy.
Absolutely. You hear it's so funny when I hear my students who are 10 years out and they're millennials and they'll roll their eyes about Gen Z. And I'm like, yeah, you realize we as Gen Xers rolled our eyes about millennials. Mm-hmm. And so the trick is let's not roll our eyes. All right, let's understand kind of how were they raised? What was it like when they were going to school, and what was their social experiences like? And the question is, how do we be effective, and how do we lead them at a moment in time? And so even as a teacher, I got to a point a couple of years ago where the way I was able to teach the students changed, especially coming out of COVID, because the students were different. And all of my old tricks, all of the habits that I had developed, I used to be, my strategy was tough love. You never came to my class late and you never came unprepared. And the students knew no one loved them more. and it's true, right? Look, I have found doctors for dying parents. We've had kids in our home on Christmas when they had nowhere to go. I love my students. But that was not working with the students that were sitting in front of me. And I had to sit back and say, how do I need to change in order to be effective? I had lessons to teach, but I had to figure out how to get through. And so, I think as we get more senior, that's part of what makes it harder for us to do. Mm-hmm. And in a world that's changing so much, it's hard for us as leaders. We have to understand that it's hard for the people who work for us and hard for our customers. And great leaders kind of need to stand up and lead in these volatile times. You don't like what's happening in the news. You don't like what's happening out of Washington and everything else. There's a little bit of this is kind of normal and has been for the last 25 years, and leaders need to help their teams get through it.
That leads me to another question here. Do you think it's harder to be a leader now than it was in the past? Because just based on what you said, which again, it feels cyclical. It's like we've all been through this before. We were just younger and our bosses were older, et cetera, et cetera. So do you think it's still harder to be a leader now than it was in the past? Or is it just, it's the same, it's just that the issues are different?
I think it's harder, but that doesn't mean it was easy back in the old days.
Okay.
And let me give you an example of why I think it's harder. So you talked about, I have the chapter on unserious behaviors in a serious world.
Yeah.
Where we see leaders do stuff we know it's wrong and they do it anyways and they seem to get rewarded for it. And I have a whole chapter on things that leaders do that it's just we know this is not okay, and yet these people are held up on a pedestal.
Okay, right. So give me at least 2 or 3 stories from that, because again, we want people to read the book too, without giving too much away. I enjoyed that chapter, I think, more than the other chapters.
Okay, so let me give a few. There's 6 behaviors that identify. Let me talk about 2 or 3. Okay. The first one is replacing decorum with outrageousness. And the examples of that, remember when Zuck and Elon were going to get into a cage match and fight?
Right.
And we all knew this was wrong and we were all going to watch it anyways. And yet, and this was in every media, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times. Why are these people writing about this? And why are the 2 of the richest men in the world talking about doing this shit? Right. It was just it was wrong. Similarly, I'll go, AOC, she tweeted out at one point something to the effect of, if Republicans are sexually frustrated, they can't sleep with me, they shouldn't take it out on my personal life. And I remember seeing that tweet and thinking to myself, I could not imagine Indira Gandhi or Golda Meir or Margaret Thatcher sending that out.
Yeah.
And so that outrageousness gets them attention.
Get some eyeballs, get some clicks, right?
Exactly. And leaders think, well, that's how I'm supposed to be to break through. And one of the lessons that I try to point out in the book is I show 15 to 20 leaders who aren't like that, who were hugely successful by any figure of merit. Like, that's very clear that they are successful. And so what I want people to say is, like, we know this is wrong, but we see it anyways.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be that way. I think another behavior that I would highlight, and I'll choose this one because it's a little more controversial and perhaps less obvious. I call it disdain for customers. And the example I give is Tim Cook. So
wow.
Right? Exactly. Nobody expected that.
Yeah.
But let's think about this. The whole with iMessage blue bubble and green bubble?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. And so Cook was getting a lot of pressure about, why don't you support RCS, which they do now, but why don't you? And he was kind of hemming and hawing. And for his first line was, buy your mother an iPhone, which is like, well, that's kind of snarky.
Yeah.
And then he said something that I'll never forget: our customers aren't asking for it. All right, I got to tell you, Keith, I'm going to guess in the last 10 to 12 years, I've personally spent $100,000 on Apple products, right? There's me, my wife, our 3 kids. They all have iPhones. I have a Pixel phone, which I happen to like. I'm doing this from a Mac. I have an iPad. We have all of that stuff. If I've spent $100,000, by the way, I bet I've spent $50,000 on cables, right? And cables that are broken or connectors have changed.
And we all have that box of cables that are sitting somewhere because we should, throw it out or recycle it.
Right.
But that as soon as you do that, you're going to need that cable.
You're going to need it. So, in our family, probably like yours, we have a family group text and group chat. And because Apple didn't support RCS, we'd share a video, we'd share a still image, and it would look like crap to the whole group because they were downsampling it because they wanted it to look bad on my iPhone.
Yeah, you're the green bubble guy.
I'm a green bubble. And by the way, I didn't care if my kids taunted me for a green bubble. My kids have taunted me since they were born. But that notion of my customers aren't asking for it, like that felt like, really? Like, how much money do I have to give you before you consider me your customer? And I think that attitude, really what he was saying is he didn't want to support it because he was trying to create a walled garden of content. And it was very disingenuous. And the whole world sees through this. And I just don't think that leaders need to treat their customers that way. And so this is kind of that notion of when someone's trying to be too clever by half. The last thing I'll say is working on unimportant things. I want to encourage leaders to work on things that matter. We've got a lot of challenges in the world. Let's talk about NFTs. NFTs kind of always made me laugh, right? Because it's like, wait, I've got 6 million JPEGs. They're exactly the same. Literally, every 1 and 0 is exactly the same.
Yeah. This
one's worth $3 million and the rest are worth nothing. It's kind of like the emperor had no clothes, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. And so, like, these unserious behaviors, it's like we've got such challenges in society. The role of leaders, I want them to kind of work on problems that matter. They can do good and do well.
Yeah.
And those are the behaviors I would encourage people to avoid.
Well, is there still a lot of groupthink that goes on with business leaders? And again, I think you mentioned the fear of missing out. And that's why you see if one company decides to do a return to office mandate, then all of a sudden, someone's like, well, Dell did it and Amazon did it, so we have to do it too. And instead of actually trusting your employees or working with your employees. And, it's like, I still don't understand why, look, just do the hybrid, collaborate at home on a couple of days and be in the office in a couple of days. But some people still don't get it.
Well, Nicholas Bloom here at Stanford did a bunch of research which showed that hybrid of being able to do both was actually the most effective. And I think that to your point about FOMO and watching what others do, a great leader's got to balance 2 things: learning and looking at the market and figuring out what's happening and what are other people doing, but also thinking for himself and herself. I'm a big believer in free will. I'm a big believer that leaders can take in information, process it, and come up with their own opinions. And by the way, these issues are hard. To pretend that they're not hard is disingenuous. I like to say that leaders have to lead on very nuanced issues in a world that has very little time for nuance. So on the work from home versus in the office, people are more effective when they collaborate together, right? We know this. You build bonds, you build closeness and relationships. On other times, you need quiet to focus and everything else.
Right.
And so I don't need to be, by the way, in a veal fattening pen. I mean, just a desk that I'm sharing with somebody in an open, cube space. Sometimes I need quiet. If I can get that at home, let me work at home. And some jobs and sometimes will allow that. And some jobs we need to be together. Like I can teach in the classroom and I can teach on Zoom. I prefer the classroom, but I need to be able to do both. And I think that's what I would say I want leaders to be thinking about of these issues. They're difficult. Find a way to think through at a moment in time, what's the right decision. And by the way, not everyone's going to agree with you. Every hard problem is going to be 51-49.
Yeah.
And that's where leaders need to stand up and say, this is the decision I've made. This is why I've made that decision. And now we need to move forward together.
Yeah. And the interesting part is that after a decision is made, I think a lot of companies sometimes are fearful of admitting that they may have made a mistake and going back to the the other side as well. I'm not sure if it applies to the return to the office, but again, I see the extremes too. It's like you've got some people who are like, nope, I want to work at home, all the time, and then the others are like, nope, I want you to be in the office 5 days a week. It's like there's a middle ground, and again, these are the cross pressures and the pendulum that I'm
exactly
talking about, right?
And it's hard. And that's the other thing is trying to understand that people waking up every day and saying, oh my goodness, what's happened today in the world? It's been that way for 25 years. And the press has an incentive to kind of make things inflammatory and to make things, in screaming headlines because that sucks people in. We see this with social media. And so leaders need to be able to process, what's going on, take a deep breath. Let's think this through, and then we move forward once we've kind of gotten the data that we need.
Yeah, Rob, it's so easy to blame the media.
Well, I don't blame it.
As a member of the media, I roll my eyes at just as much as this. When you're talking about the Musk and Zuckerberg thing, I rolled my eyes at I kept going, why are people covering this? This is so stupid. And it's just always that you get other pressures from people who are like, well, we need clicks, we need revenue, it's because the model we live in now.
Yes.
Whereas when I was working for a magazine or a newspaper and you just had that print copy, I don't know if you would have ever covered that thing because you had layers of gatekeepers that could actually say, yeah, that's stupid, that's not stupid.
And I also would point out that I don't blame the media, but you exactly said the key thing is what's the business model of the people who are in the media.
Yeah.
Trying to understand that. So it's stimulus response in the same way that I can't and choose not to look down on Gen Z. If I play to stereotypes, they only want to talk about their feelings. They don't want to work hard. They're not dependable.
Yeah.
They want to be CEOs right away. It's like, yeah, when I was 25 years old, I was a knucklehead too. All right. Okay, fine.
Yeah. I was a slacker. That was the term they used for all of us in Gen X, slacker.
And so then the question is, how do we help them be the best versions of themselves? Right. That's what leaders are. See and understand what their lived experience is in, teach them about what it means to be dependable, reliable, and to deliver. But also, by the way, maybe, Andy Grove and some of the other leaders that I grew up under, they were really brusque. Maybe I need to be a little bit less brusque, right? You can't do what you used to do before, but I still can hold people accountable and say, look, these are the expectations. This is how we're going to do this.
Yeah.
And I think that the leaders we studied in the book, there's so many of them that do such a good job, like Jim Fish, the CEO of Waste Management. He's so good. One of the last chapters is around purpose. How do you balance ambition with statesmanship or stewardship or stateswomanship, whatever word you want to use? Jim would always ask, whose brand is it anyways? Like when you think about Waste Management, it's not his brand. Mm-hmm. It belongs to the employees and to the shareholders. And he was a steward of that brand and is the steward of that brand while he's the CEO. And if one has that mindset, it's like, how do I lead my team on the journey of where we're trying to get to and the things we need to accomplish?
Yeah, and so a lot of the concepts that you have in this book, you're aiming at CIOs or CEOs and the upper levels. Do these also apply to the middle manager, or even the rank and file worker? They're not managing anybody, but is it still interesting for them to maybe understand what's going on? Again, the cross pressures I feel from middle managers would be hearing from up above you, do this, and the people down below are like, we don't want to do this. Like, we know what we're doing. These people are just, it's like vision versus execution. There's your two cross pressures.
And so for the book is tended for kind of C-level all the way down through managers. And by the way, the cross pressures will apply to even individual contributors who need to know internal and external and things and how to interact with people as well, right? Kind of the ability to deliver, but also, expressing empathy. And so the first thing I would say is that while the examples might come from the C-level executives that I've had the blessing of getting to know and studying, all of the lessons can be applied throughout a company, large company, small company. The examples I give are global as well. You see them in different contexts. And so I think, issues around communication and collaboration tools, that we all deal with that no matter what level we're at in the company.
Yeah.
Trying to see the whole human. We understand that no matter what level we're at in the company. Understanding what's going on local and global. It's funny, leaders and even managers or individual contributors may not have had to think about that so much in the past, but I think they have to now because their job is so much more directly impacted by what's happening in other parts of the world.
Yeah.
And so I hope the lessons that we can draw upon can be applied to everybody working inside of an organization. And by the way, I just had a great conversation with somebody in the government. None of the examples that I used in the book were government examples, but her comment to me was, these are the exact cross pressures I'm dealing with as a member of this particular organization in the government. And so I think the lessons can be universally applied.
Okay. And you talked with a lot of different CEOs, and I want to bring up one of them in particular because there was a lot of news around this person. It was the CEO of 23andMe. And so when you wrote the book, she hadn't, the sale or the company had not gone bankrupt yet.
Correct.
Since then, the company's now gone bankrupt. I want you to tell me a story about what you learned from kind of interviews with her, and then does this public bankruptcy change your opinion of maybe what she was doing or some of the pressure she was facing? Or is it just kind of, there's also a lot of news about, whether as a customer of that, if the whole data is now private. But I think I want you to bring up, what you learned from her.
So Anne Wojcicki, the CEO of 23andMe, is somebody I've known for about a decade and had the good fortune of studying her and the company over the decade. And to your point, when I wrote the book, the stock was below $1. And I even wrote in the book, by the time you read this, like, they could be private, they could be out of business, they could be acquired. We don't know what's going to happen. And I think if you look at what she was trying to do with the company, the big failure in their hypothesis and where they were going is her business model was we have these consumer kits which allow us to get the data, and the hope was to get breakthrough drugs that could be used from the information of the kits that could be applied broadly. And the bottom line is they never got a breakthrough drug. So the business model failed.
Okay.
Now, there were certain tactical mistakes that we can look back on and say, yeah, that didn't work. One of the biggest ones is they should never have gone public with a SPAC. They made a decision when they went public that the valuation was higher. They could get more money at a higher valuation and therefore sell less of the company. And in hindsight, if they had stayed private, she would have been able to probably work through a lot of these challenges when it wasn't in the public eye and you didn't have a daily scoreboard. And in fact, one of the lessons that she talked to me about when I interviewed her for the book was she had two classes of investors. Some investors who loved the consumer business and some investors who loved the therapeutics, kind of the swing big and hope that you get there with a higher probability of failure. And so she had to manage that duality, different at levels of types of investors. Had she stayed private, she probably would have been able to work through this. Anne's crazy smart. My takeaway on this is Anne made certain mistakes as a leader, and all leaders make mistakes. Mm-hmm. Shouldn't have gone public on a SPAC. They weren't ready. The hypothesis has still yet to be proven out on whether or not you can develop breakthrough drugs using the data the way they've done. And so the bottom line is we have a business that just hasn't succeeded around the vision and the capital structure. Do I think Anne is a bad person and a bad leader? No. I think Anne took some risks and took some challenges and didn't succeed. And she will tell you and tell people about mistakes that she's made. We're all human and we're all works in progress. But I think I learned from her how she managed some of these dualities of what she was trying to do. Similarly, John Donahoe, who's the CEO of Nike, I talk about him in the book, and John's been a great leader. Like, you can't argue with his track record. He ran Bain, he ran eBay, he ran ServiceNow, right? Those are 3 humongous wins. Like, any business leader gets 1 of those, you're good. You get 3 of those, you're beyond good.
Yeah.
And when I wrote about him with Nike, I was writing about how he was managing the duality of managing China. And yet, he had to be forced out because during the pandemic, he made a bet on selling direct. And that actually didn't work with the Nike business model. And that created, supply chain problems. It created inventory problems. It created go-to-market problems. And in the end, he left himself vulnerable to activist investors. And there was just so much heat that he wasn't being effective as the CEO, and he had to leave the organization. Do I think John is a bad leader? Of course not. John is one of the smartest people I've had the blessing of knowing. He's got a heart the size of the state of Texas.
Yeah.
But he made a bad choice in that decision. And so I think that's also part of how we learn from that. Even great leaders sometimes make bad choices. That doesn't mean they're bad people.
Right.
And that doesn't mean they're not good. And that also doesn't mean that they didn't make mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. We had Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff on the show recently. And that was one of the things I think he was talking about on our show and on other shows about. He faced a lot of pressure a couple of years ago because the company was not doing so well, and he had to let go a lot of people, probably for the first time. And I think he was saying that he didn't expect the type of blowback that he got, but that he has learned from kind of that incident. It was probably in 2022 or 2023, right. I think. So again, recognizing as a leader that you can still make mistakes, even if you've been the leader of the company for 20 something years, was pretty refreshing.
And if you're sitting in that chair, you're gonna take heat.
Yeah.
So the example you're talking about, especially so much of what they had with the culture of Ohana, and Ohana being family, and people want to throw it in his face. How do you lay off your family? Yeah. And it's like, I got a business to run. And I don't know Mark well. Everything I've heard about him is that he is a kind man. He and his wife are very generous and philanthropically in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And I think most people historically have enjoyed working for Salesforce. But yeah, everyone's going to make mistakes. I spend time in the book talking about what I saw with Jeff Immelt when I watched him get vilified as he walked out of GE. And in the time I got to spend with him, for 17 years, he was the CEO of GE. And as he liked to share, for 15 years, he was the greatest CEO in the world. And for 2 years, he was the dumbest CEO that ever existed. And he'd look at me and say, Rob, I'm the same guy.
Yeah.
Right. And he was probably never that brilliant and that much of a genius. And he was never that horrible. But nonetheless, you're sitting in that chair, you get all the credit and all the blame. And Jeff never complained to me. Like, he never complained that he thought he was getting a raw deal or anything else. He's like, I don't get to complain. Yeah. Look at the life that I've gotten to live. And you think about someone like Jeff, he never swung back. As he wrote about in his book, when Welch, vilified him, that hurt.
Yeah.
But you don't go out there and say that hurts. That's not the job of a CEO. I watched Andy Grove go through the Pentium crisis, and Andy and Intel, we messed that up, something awful. Your readers may not even remember this. We had an obscure bug in one of our flagship microprocessors, and it became a fatal mistake.
I do remember that. Yeah.
And Andy thought we were being treated so unfairly because it was just an obscure bug that no one was going to run into, which was true. And it was 8 digits to the right of the decimal point before anybody would see anything. And we totally messed it up. And then his answer was, we were one of the most valuable companies in the world. We got to be better and hold ourselves accountable to it. And so I think part of the lessons that we can draw from the book, whether it's Anne Wojcicki, whether it's John Donahoe, whether it's Jeff Immelt, whether it's Andy Grove, these are all great leaders who had challenges in their careers. And, it's going to be ups and downs, and about how do leaders get through those tough days. That's also part of being a systems leader, is understanding today might be tough, but tomorrow's going to be better. Mm-hmm. And we got to figure out how we run towards the disruption and embrace the crises and figure out how can we use this to our advantage and help our teams get to the other side.
Do you think that kind of the message of the book then is to just try to find that right balance between all of those different cross pressures, or is there something else? I may have missed, by the time I got to the end of the book, I enjoyed the story so much, but then I was like, so now I understand that there's all these cross pressures, but what do I do, or what can I do as a leader to make it, just to be aware of them and just don't screw up?
So it's funny. In the last chapter in the book, there's a set of messages. One of them is the frameworks that we give. It's a way of thinking. And so the first thing is this is a way of thinking, a way of acting, a way of looking at things. So it's about changing how we approach these problems. But there are some steps that people can do. One of the things that I talk about is finding trusted parties, both inside the company and outside the company, who will tell you the truth so you don't get isolated from things. I talk about embracing and running towards the disruption, learning new technologies and letting go of the past, even though that's very, very difficult to do. I talk about the importance of, helping people understand context. One of the sentences we like to talk about is that truth equals facts plus context. And if we can understand and know how to communicate context to people, the facts are the facts, that helps define and lead people as we communicate. And you have to be doing that over and over again. So there are 5 or 6 steps that I talk about in the end of the book that are specific things people can do. At any moment in time, these are like tools in a tool belt, a hammer, a screwdriver, a tape measure, whatever you need. And you try these different tools. I am not saying this is going to be easy. And in fact, I don't think things are going to slow down. Like Alvin Toffler wrote Future Shock in 1970, where he predicted fast fashion, the move to cities, and the personal computer. It's like reading Nostradamus, right? And that was, 55 years ago. And he coined the phrase information overload. Well, technology has only sped up since then. And I think that's our new normal. And the last 25 years of crises, as we talked about, from dot-com meltdown to 9/11 to global financial crisis to populism 1.0, which was Brexit, yellow vests in France, Bolsonaro and Trump, to COVID, and now to what we're seeing today with the current dynamics. This is now normal. And leaders, it's kind of like, okay,
you just triggered the Zoom with your thumbs up. No more thumbs up, Rob.
Sorry, I didn't mean to stop the recording.
No. The recording's still going. Keep going.
Okay. The thing that I would say is we don't want to have people don't lose your shit in these difficult times. Keep a steady hand. Yeah. It's gonna be better, and help your team get through it.
Okay. And so, what do you hope that readers will get out of the book? What is your goal? And obviously, you want to sell a lot of copies, and I'm assuming you're going to be using this book in your classes at Stanford. Yep. But what is what's the goal for a CEO that reads this book? Recommending it to their friends so that they get them buy more. But the altruistic goal, give me that one.
Right. No matter where they are in the company, CEO, vice president, director, manager, or individual contributor, the message that I want them to take away is that you can do this. You don't have to be overwhelmed by everything that's going on in the world and what you're seeing in these cross pressures. Like, it feels like that people, no matter what they do, they're going to get it wrong. Whatever decision they make, they're going to get canceled or vilified. And the pendulums are swinging so fast. Do I speak up on social issues? Do I not speak up on social issues?
Yeah.
And what I want people to realize and think about is it's okay. They can do this. And if they kind of, think about some of the lessons that come out of the book, what are the cross pressures? What are good examples of behaviors of great systems leaders? How can they apply it in their role? And just kind of like one day at a time, one step at a time, they'll be able to get there. I think it's more a message of I want them to have the confidence to get through this and not give in to the unseriousness that we see out there. Because again, I'll come back to free will. I believe the men and women that I teach, whether it's here at Stanford or my consulting or executive education, they can be exactly the leaders that they want to be. They have a choice to be who they want to be. And that's what I hope they take away from the book.
Yeah. But it is so hard when you've got the Willy Wonka candy factory or candy store beckoning in all of the different temptations that leaders will face on a lot of these issues, right?
Absolutely. It's hard, but that's what leadership is. Leadership is hard. Okay. If you don't want to lead, don't do it. And that's kind of my point of don't complain. It's just it's hard. We know it is.
Yeah.
And if you're going to complain, you complain at home to your spouse and your partner or your dog, and they'll love you anyways.
Yeah.
But we got to help our teams.
All right,
That's our job.
that just reminded me of one more question. I don't know if you've seen in the news recently, there were some articles around how Generation Z people in that generation do not want to become middle managers. I don't know if you saw any of these stories or trends that there a lot of people are being offered promotions and they're just saying no thanks. I'm just happy where I am because they understand the pressures that come with becoming a manager or they see a lot of reels on Instagram that constantly tell other people how bad it is to be a manager or that you're a bad boss or things like that. So Is that something that surprises you or not surprises you? Because it could affect the way businesses are run if they don't have any managers. But then there's also the flattening effect too, where people are getting rid of middle managers, and then you're just left with the CEO layer and the rank and file. I think you call them individual contributors, right?
Right.
Yeah. But then also there's studies that say that that's not good either, because then that could just blow up the structure of the company.
Keith, I think there's two lessons there. The first is you and I, as Gen Xers, we ruin these people.
We just sit back and just eat the popcorn.
This is our fault.
It all come on.
We raised them. I've got 3 Gen Z children whom I love to death.
Yeah.
But it's like, if the notion is what they're saying is they don't want to step up and lead, we didn't teach them the blessings and joys of leading. And teach them about, what's great about being a leader, what's great about managing a team, what's great about being a part of a team, and how sometimes we need to step up. And we look up to people who help others and lead others. And so I think that some of, they say why the pressure is hard and everything else. And by the way, that's all true. But there's also it's awesome as well. Like, it's not like the Instagrammed life, the perfectly manicured life, that's not real. What's real is, there was this great scene. I don't know if you remember the movie Parenthood from back in the day, Steve Martin, etc. And one of the characters, she's married to Keanu Reeves and she's pregnant. She's like 19 years old. He's drag racing. He crashes the car and she's freaking out going, I can't handle this. I can't handle this. And her mother comes up to her and starts, saying to her, this is life. Like, this is what you married him. You're carrying his child. This is life. And you're there for each other in the difficult times. And so there's a little bit of that of it's okay. There are hard days and there are times that are tough, but we can get through this and we can guide and help others. And so if Gen Z doesn't want to lead, I blame you and me.
Oh, no, it's never my fault.
Yeah. I'm not going to blame them. I'm going to blame us. On the other hand, I think we can always be learning as individuals and as people. And I think that the hope is to show people that there are kind, beautiful, wonderful leaders that I talk about in the book who you see what they've done. Michael Dowling, who runs Northwell Health, is one of the most amazing humans I've ever met. And I see someone like that. It's like, no, I would aspire to be that kind of leader. And I want to show that to people and say to them, look, you can do that too. And Michael makes mistakes. Michael's not perfect.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the thing is I want people to know that they can do this and they can learn from others and, copy some of the behaviors and patterns.
Well, just really quickly then, do we expect our leaders to be perfect? Again, I mean, I could bring you back to Steve Jobs. We all raised him to the status of demigod, but he made some pretty big mistakes too, right?
Well, I have yet to meet the world's perfect person, Keith. The only perfect person I ever met was my grandfather.
No, I was pointing to myself, but I
got that. But my point being is that, by the way, that's also I don't want to pick on the press, but I'm going to. We build up leaders and then we tear them down, right? The narrative is the hero's journey, and then we find the hero is flawed, right? And then there's the rebuild of the hero. And so, I just kind of think that, anybody we're writing about who we're saying they're perfect, they're not. The great leaders will say, yeah, I've had a good run or I've done some things right. By the way, here's the stuff that I messed up.
Yeah.
And those are the leaders. Like Jeff and I have had so many leaders in our class. And the ones that really, I think, have the biggest impact are the ones who are unexpectedly say, yeah, I got this one right. I got this one wrong. Here's what I learned. Here's what I'm trying to do better. We had Roger Goodell from the NFL in class.
All right. We're not going to talk about Goodell. I've still got an issue with Goodell. No.
Hold on. But at one point,
Patriots fan here, dude.
Oh, sorry about that. But at one point he looked at one of the students. The student was asking him a hard question and Roger looked at him and said, here's how I'm thinking about it. If you've got a better answer, I'm all ears. And it was genuine. He was very serious. He said, I don't know how to do this. And if you've got it, he had no pride of authorship that he had to come up with the right answer. Mm-hmm. He was seeking to figure out how to kind of address this issue that the student raised. And I found that to be very, very inspiring to watch somebody of his stature look at a 27-year-old and say, yeah, help me, come on board. I could use help with this. Right. And I think that's how leaders can be. And I want them to feel that they can be that way.
All right. Rob Siegel, again, here's the book, The Systems Leader. Go buy it. Amazon or your favorite local bookstore. Again, thanks again, Rob, for being on the show. This was fantastic.
Always great to see you. Hopefully I can come back again in the future.
All right, we'll do. Definitely. All right, that's all the time we have for today's episode. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, add any thoughts below if you're watching on YouTube. Check us out on YouTube if you are watching from a different location. Join us every week for new episodes of Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Thanks for watching.